Unashamed, the recovery podcast.
And hello, recovery family, and welcome to another episode of the Unashamed Recovery Podcast with Josh and Drew. That's Drew.
Hey guys.
I'm Josh. And here at the Unashamed Recovery Podcast, we believe that there is healing in the story of our scars, and that it is okay to not be okay.
It is our sole mission to break the shame and stigma of addiction by sharing real stories of real recovery by real people that have been in addiction, or those even that outside of addiction, kind of like today's episode, Josh.
Yeah. Today's episode is a little bit different, and I'm excited about it. Last month we talked about living the shame, and we talked about getting to that step 12, and all about that. But on today's episode, we're going to go on beyond that. We're going to talk about something that we've really never talked about on the show before. And I'm not going to give too much away. Let's just go in. We'll just introduce the guests, and we'll just let that speak for itself. Because when I tell you this, you're like, oh, okay, well, this is what it's about. Right? Today's guest that's joined us is the director at Spouses Choosing Hope in Addiction and Recovery. And that should tell you everything you need to know right there. Today's guest is Miss Krisha Agent. And I said that right, correct?
Yes, you said that.
Hey,
Still have that country twang.
I'm on a great roll today, Drew.
Krisha.
Hey, I don't care. I'm making up for last month. I'm making up for last month. So we're on a good roll. So, so go ahead and tell everybody, all of our wonderful listeners out there, all 5 of them, about what it is that is so special and so unique about Spouses Choosing Hope in Addiction and Recovery. What are y'all about? What are you doing? What it is that makes y'all tick?
It's unique, for one, because there's nothing else out there that is specifically and directly for the spouse. And I found that out whenever I was going through my season and I was trying to reach out and find something that would help me, something that would support me, but also something that was faith-based, wouldn't lead me in the wrong directions with my decisions, and there just wasn't anything out there. Everything's close. Most of the answers that I would get from people was, go to Celebrate Recovery, which is great. But I needed direction and support and advice and information specifically for me, the spouse, and what to expect, what to look out for, encouragement, all of these different things, and it just didn't exist. There wasn't anything out there for that.
And to me, that's just absurd, because as years ago, okay, maybe so, because recovery was still wrapped in stigma.
Right.
And you didn't talk about recovery outside of recovery. It's kind of like Fight Club. Yeah. We don't talk about recovery.
Talk about fight. Number one rule
I've
of Fight
thought
Club.
the same thing before.
Well, I just feel like, even in my family, there was so much shame that was just brought with it. As soon as, your parents were like, oh, well, he's out there on drugs, or, that you're the person that's having to live with somebody that's going through that. There was even shame and guilt that was piled on top of them as well.
Yeah.
And it was just, it's a weight.
Everybody's looking at you like, well, what are you doing?
Right.
What are you going to do? Well, how are you going to handle this? Are you going to handle it like we think you should? I don't think you're doing it right. There was a lot of
Judgmental.
weight.
Yeah. It becomes a judgmental thing.
Mm-hmm.
And people give you their opinions, which is most of the time the lowest form of communication that exists.
Mm-hmm.
It can be opinionated. I'm not dissing that. But what I'm saying is, when it comes to matters of the heart, matters of spirituality, or something that's really solidified in our being, how we feel about something, and that feels like it's invalidated because people are always just kind of like, well, that's not what I would have done.
Right.
I would have walked away. But how many times in society now do you have people walking away from things and children are getting hurt? The addicts becoming worse, like we were saying earlier. That's why I'm kind of proud to hear that there's something out there, because there's so many people that I've even sponsored that, you know, through them going through rehab, they ended up with divorce papers at the end of it. And it was just kind of like...
His spouse is just out there hanging out, left by themselves.
Because they don't know what else to do, you know, and they, like you said, they don't have
They
anybody
don't know
to
how
talk
to
to.
recover from what they just went through.
Right.
So,
What's a lot of trauma that's...
I want to acknowledge something, because you made mention about sober recovery, and now me and Drew, we're both sober recovery. You know, the podcast, we interview a lot of people from sober recovery. Now, that's a whole other topic. Like, sober recovery is not the only pathway to recovery. When I say that, but our circle is sober recovery. So it's interesting that you made mention of it was suggested to you to try sober recovery. Now, for me, when I came out of my addiction and I got into sober recovery, I'm telling you, it was a difference. I was in recovery for 4 years before my wife started coming to sober recovery with me.
Right.
And then once she started coming to the meetings, she was like, okay, I get it. Mm-hmm. And to have her involved and on the same page where she can, you know, me and her can have these talks at home now.
Right.
So that was so interesting when you said that, because that was the first thing, when she said that, I was like, man, that's interesting, because aside from her partaking in her own recovery and sober recovery, there's nothing for just her to go as a spouse of somebody in recovery.
We actually have spouses that have become
I know that.
leaders.
I know that,
Which
but I'm
is
just saying.
phenomenal.
But I'm saying, like, when they get in there, they're working their own recovery.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But just to be a spouse who's outside of that, like, to me, that's, yeah. So, anyway, and then also for this to be a Christ-centered support group, to me, that in a culture where we're getting so far away from Christ, any chance that we can get, we find a group that is Christ-centered. I feel like it is important for us to support that and to back that, because our culture is just getting so far away from that. So how does this support group being Christ-centered, how does that help your mandate, your goal for what you're trying to do?
It's my favorite question.
I saw her face like that.
It's almost like that was planned.
Right.
It is not the most popular answer, but it's my favorite one.
We like that.
As a spouse of somebody who is in addiction or even in recovery, oftentimes we think that they are all of the problem. And they're not. And what really made the difference in my husband's recovery, in the restoration of our marriage afterwards, in my recovery, what made the difference was a relationship with Christ. And if you want your spouse to make all of these changes, you have to make some too. And you have to have a very solid relationship with Christ, and He has to be your main focus and your main purpose in order to be successful.
Ooh.
If all of your focus is on your spouse and all of the things that are wrong, you're gonna lose focus with the success of your journey.
Yeah.
Well, not only that, you start to build offenses. You know, you start to build for everything that you're holding in, that builds resentment. That builds that little, okay, well, I'm not going to talk about my issues, I just want to talk about his. And when you start focusing just wholly on that, then you're focusing on the trash on that side of the street, not your own. You know, we're not cleaning up our side. And so literally we're asking, then we're going to ask them to come back and walk on the side of the street that's still got, you know, some litter on it. You know what I mean? If that makes any sense, to be metaphorical. But
Yeah.
that's just one of those things. Like, it's really, really difficult. And I'm glad that to hear that answer.
You can get very consumed and very overwhelmed with
Right.
all of the things about them and what they're doing that you can't control. And I'm not saying that if you do all of those things and you really, really cling to the Lord, that your spouse is definitely for sure going to get sober and everything's going to be great. I'm not going to make that guarantee, but the guarantee that I always taught in S.C.H.A.R was that if you do that, if you stay close with Christ and you continue to get closer to Him, you will be okay no matter what their decision is.
That makes
Whether
sense.
they get sober or not.
Right.
If you and Jesus are good, you will be okay.
That makes sense, yeah.
I kind of love the acronym. Did you
S.C.H.A.R.
catch that? Yeah, that's awesome.
Well, and I've even got it written down here, and I still didn't catch that until she said that.
Right, I was like, hold on. That was one of those things that kind of.
And you would think with us being in sober recovery, we could point out an acronym, but
Oh my gosh.
but anyway, so moving on along.
But what I kind of hear so far is that there's a similarity to living with an addict, or going through the process with them. It's almost similar to grief.
It is 100%.
Yeah, it's just as similar to grief, because you're having to watch this person kind of not be that person that you fell in love with a little bit, and then they kind of have died to you on an emotional side somewhat. So that is tough. Because there's a lot of times that we look at grief and we literally just push it aside as an emotion that we shouldn't have, because the way social media is set up today, the way the world is, well, I'm going to cancel you because you're too sad or you're being too naggy. I don't want to hear what you have to say. Like you've already talked about it 1,000 times to me. I don't want to hear it anymore. Same way with grief. You should be over it already. How many times have you heard that?
I've actually used the story of Lazarus in my testimony a lot of times.
Oh, wow.
Talking about Mary and Martha watching Lazarus, their best friend, or their brother, and Jesus was their best friend. They watched Lazarus get sick and get sicker and sicker and sicker, and they call for Jesus, and he doesn't come, and then he dies.
Right.
And then Jesus shows up, and they say,
Days later.
if you had been here, he wouldn't have died. I use that a lot in my testimony, because Jesus tells them, but if I would have came, you wouldn't have gotten to see him resurrected and brought back to life. And that's what I feel like I watched. I feel like I watched my husband die, and I felt like Jesus was taking too long. But then when he showed up, I got to watch my husband resurrect.
Not on our time, but right on time.
Yes, exactly.
Never our time, but right on
Exactly.
time. Man, you can use that if you want to, Josh. Write that down.
Right there. Man, that's so good. So when you were describing S.C.H.A.R, you were saying that this was born out of a season. So let's talk about that season. Let's talk about your side of this, because I've been dying to get into this, and I think this is a perfect chance for us to just go and move into this. So go ahead and let's talk about your side of this story. Like, where does that start? And if you were writing this out into a book, and you were writing out chapter 1, what would chapter 1 be called?
Chapter 1 would be called Love Lived Out.
Ooh. Episode title right there.
I'm writing that down.
Episode title. I
That's
like it.
amazing.
And you were worried about that.
I was.
So go ahead and what does that season look like? Where does that start off?
I became a follower of Jesus in 2012, and my husband had not become a follower of Jesus yet.
Okay.
Okay, so we had been married. We had been married for 2 years when I got saved, and then we had been married for 7 years when he got saved. Okay, so what happens is we spent a lot of the years that we dated and the first 2 years of our marriage, and neither one of us were followers of Christ. And that made a real mess of things. It makes compromises in your life. You do things that is going to lead you further and further away from a life with Christ. And you are okay with things that you shouldn't be okay with. And that's kind of how it led into that season. And I came to the end of myself, and I got saved, and he was not yet. And so then what happens is you have two people that are trying to be one flesh, but they're not. They're two different ones, and they're going in two different directions. And so the division becomes bigger, and the gap becomes wider. And I didn't know about his addiction. I lived with a man, and he had an addiction, and I didn't know. It's hard to say, because usually when I say that, most people are like, how could you not know that? I didn't know.
But it's easy to put on a mask.
Yeah.
It's very, very easy to put on a mask and to say, hey, well, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, if she wasn't raised in an environment as a kid where that was prevalent,
Yeah.
and she has nothing to base off of, like my wife, she didn't know.
Right.
She had no clue.
The only time I was really familiar with addiction was when it was very obvious they were not a functioning addict. The only addicts that I had ever come in contact with, everybody knew that they were not sober looking at them. And so in my mind, it would be obvious if that was an issue.
Right.
But he was highly functioning. And so to me, that never crossed my mind. I knew that something was wrong, and I knew that he was fading away more and more from the man that I knew, and things were just getting hard. Our relationship was hard. The fights were worse. There was a lot of division. There was a lot of meanness, just real cold. There were a lot of secrets. There was constant disappearing. I didn't feel like I had any stability. I didn't feel like I could depend on him for a lot. And that wasn't him. That was not normal. So I knew that things were not normal, but I did not know that it was drugs. And so for the worst of his addiction lasted for about 2 years. Now his full addiction from start to finish, I think, was probably 6. But whenever it was really, really, really awful was for about 2 years. And we had a little girl at the time, and it got really bad about the time that she was probably 6 months old, until he went to treatment, and he went to treatment when she was 2.5. And so during that time was when it was so bad, he ended up losing his job, and he couldn't keep a job, and then couldn't get a job, and so he was without work for about 2 years, and so a lot of the financial weight was on me. But it's almost like if you're watching somebody drown, and you think that they're gone under, and then every now and then you would get a glimpse of them, and you would know that they were still in there. That's what it was like.
That's a good visual.
Yeah. I literally just put that, you just painted like this clear picture in my head right there, and I could literally see somebody
That's
bobbing
what I felt
down.
like I was watching. Like every now, just when I thought that he was gone, and he was not the man that I knew, I would see a glimpse of the man that I know loves me, and he's trying, and he's not as bad as he was yesterday or whatever, and that would kind of keep me holding on.
So getting those glimpses of him coming back up to the surface, was that kind of giving you some like false hope, or was that?
Yeah, it did.
Okay.
It did. It prolonged the whole thing for him and for me. It really did. It just prolonged it.
So at what point or how did you finally find out? Because you said you didn't know this was going on. Like, what was that moment where you finally kind of put 2 and 2 together and equaled 6?
So I told you things were awful, and I just didn't know why. And it's very strange, but I had an anonymous, well, it wasn't anonymous, a mutual friend of ours that we never see or talk to, apparently crossed brief paths with him, and decided to send me a message on Facebook on my 30th birthday. and tell me that they have something to tell me. And then they told me. And the thing is, I already knew that, you know, they left a message and they said, call me when you get a chance, when you leave the house, when you're not around him. And I knew what they were going to tell me, and I was, sounds really strange, but I was really looking forward to the call and kind of relieved, because I felt like this was gonna end, because if I could pinpoint what was wrong,
Yeah.
then we could start fixing it.
Right. Kind of like, almost kind of like closure.
Yeah.
In a sense.
Yeah, because I knew things were going on, and I've been looking for the answers, and I would try, and I would get him up against the wall, and I'd be like, okay, we're fixing to find out what it is, and he would not budge. Mainly because I made a huge mistake at one point in our marriage, and I had told him that I could handle a lot of things in marriage, but the one thing I would never put up with is if he ever got hooked on drugs. Which told him, once he was in that
Keep it quiet.
position, I can't tell her, or she'll leave.
You were no longer a safe space.
No.
Yeah.
And I did that.
So it became, I can only picture that y'all were like war partners at that point. It was like battle buddies, but you're not on the same team. You know what I mean? And that's rough.
And not only did I basically threaten him, so he was afraid to tell me, I also told the enemy what he could use against me in my marriage.
Yeah.
Because Satan doesn't know everything. He only knows what you show him and what you tell him. He's not God. And I told him, this is what you can do to ruin my marriage. And so he said, you got it. I'm going to do that.
Wow.
Man. So, I want to ask you a question, and I hear so many talk about it, especially my wife told me this during ours. Did you feel like part of it was your fault? So, that is a interesting area to talk about, and I want a detour for me to talk about that. Are you okay with that, Drew?
Yeah, I mean, because I literally put down here, how much accountability did you put towards yourself, or how much did you own?
Yeah.
Own that.
So for those that don't know, Ben, like my struggle was with pornography and sex, and so my wife always felt like part of my addiction was her fault, and like I tried to tell her, like, this would have happened with anybody, like it's not you that, Anyway, so what did that feel like on your end? Like, because this was not a porn and sex addiction, this was a drug addiction. So what made you feel like this was your part? Like, did you feel like, I don't know what I'm trying to ask here. Like,
Basically because we held hands walking down a sinful road up until I got saved. And so I allowed things to get, whenever, like, we would drink together and things like that. And so to me, we went down this road of teetering on substance where you could become an addict, and I didn't, and he did.
Gotcha.
On top of the fact that I had done things in our marriage that he had to forgive me for, and that were painful and disappointing for him, and I felt like that amplified his desire to numb out or to not have to deal with things that he was feeling. But also with that, God used that to remind me, you are not perfect either, and you have to be forgiven for things as well. So you're expected to be compassionate and forgiving to an extent as well, because you have had to be forgiven too.
I heard a quote not that long ago. It was, as a Christian, I don't get to love you like I would love you. Because I'm a Christian, I have to love you in the way that Christ commands me to love you. And that changes the details of the relationship. And when you apply that to marriage, then we're talking about this unconditional kind of love. Then
Right.
we're talking about this, like we were talking a couple episodes ago on reconciliation.
Yep.
Yes, I got that. I got
Because it comes
Yeah.
with obedience.
Yeah.
And that's just like we were talking about in reconciliation, I think so much of, okay, well, I ask for forgiveness, now we're good, but when you really want to reconcile and you really want that person, or you're really wanting to change for that person, or basically make that whole shift, it comes through obedience, first off, to biblical principle. Then accountability, like what we were just saying a minute ago. And it's just taking that mirror look within and saying, hey, well, look, I know I messed up here, 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 and here, and here, which is why inventories are so good. And I do mine on a daily basis. Because you kind of have to. Even with the marriage, though, it's almost like you have to take an inventory on both sides. That way you stay, like she was saying earlier, you have to keep it to where there's an understanding.
Yeah.
Of the compromise.
So, did you get to a place of reconciliation at that time, or did it come later, or is that something that still has, was reconciliation a part of that?
Reconciliation did not happen until after he got saved and he got sober.
Once again, it's a two-way street. Reconciliation can't occur from just one side. It's got to be, reconciliation is going to be on a two-way street. And, I find it interesting that it happened once he got that relationship with Christ.
Making amends can be one way. Reconciliation cannot.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
so that's interesting.
I do fully believe that the reason that God hid his addiction from me as long as he did was because he had to change my heart in a way that it would respond to his addiction the way it should, because he had to mold me and shape me and soften my heart, because remember how I felt about drugs.
Right.
And if I had found it out too early, I'm afraid that I would not have responded the way that would be pleasing to God. And so he had to, and that takes time, that's a process of softening a person and softening their heart, so
Yes.
that once I did know, I didn't have this, I'm above you, how could you be that, how could you do that? I didn't have that mentality when I found out.
Which adds to extra shame. That's a shame mentality. It's like shame on you.
By the time I found out, I was so beat down and so broken and so tired and so weary. But also my relationship with Christ had grown, and I developed mercy and love and patience and long suffering, so I was ready for the task at hand by the time I found out.
Ooh, man. So we're rapidly running out of time here. I still have a lot of ground I want to cover. But so out of all of that, and I know there's probably so much more, but out of that, how did the spouses choosing hope in addiction recovery, how did that get born out of that?
Oh, God did that. So I told you that it did not exist when we were going through what we were going through. And so he came home from treatment in March of 2018. Well, when he came home, he was looking for somewhere to get plugged in. He had to go to work, so he was looking for somewhere that he could go after work, during the week, something at least once a week to stay plugged in. And he found the river in Philadelphia. Well, he would go on Monday nights, and on Monday nights they had testimonies. Well, he comes home one Monday night and he's like, you will not believe who gave a testimony tonight. And it was a girl that we had known from high school, and she was a spouse, and her spouse was actually in treatment at the time. And she had gotten together with Mary Walker, who runs the river, and said she wanted to start up a support group for the spouses. Because she was looking for it and had it nowhere.
Yeah.
And so she started it. And that's how I got started to begin with. And then later on, as time goes on, and she moved on, and then I kind of fell in, and I started directing it after that. And actually, I want to say, so I told you that I found out about my husband's addiction on my 30th birthday.
Yep.
My very first S.C.H.A.R meeting that I attended was on my 31st birthday. I'll see you here later to the
That
date.
is awesome.
I mean, man, it's just.
God's design, man.
and we're laughing because we see this
Yeah.
episode after episode.
Yeah.
And we see it in
The intricate webs that
It's
are
just- it's
created.
And y'all that are out there listening, remember the river. We're going to be announcing some huge news coming up very soon involving us and the river. So y'all, y'all prepare for that. We got some big news coming for that. We're looking forward to working with the river. But yeah, so man, that's just amazing. And we were talking before the episode, and as of right now, the group is not meeting.
Right.
And I wish I could tell you, hey, yeah, here are the days that they're meeting, because this would be such a great resource for people. But, you know, if y'all do start meeting back, we will have that posted. We will share that. We're going to link that, because that's such a valuable resource, especially for those in our surrounding area. This podcast reaches people all over the world, but for those who are local in our local Mississippi recovery community, that's a huge asset. That's a huge tool to add to your recovery tool belt. And so when they do announce that their meetings will resume, we will post that. And with that, that's all the time we got for today. And Krisha, if somebody wants to get in contact with you, maybe they want you to come and share your story at their recovery group, or maybe they've got more information about the spouses, or maybe they want you to come and share on their recovery podcast, because there's several recovery podcasts out there. But what's a great way for somebody to contact you? Email?
Facebook, phone number, you can call my phone.
What's that email
That's
address? And
fine.
we'll have that posted in the show notes as well. What's the email?
Krisha, KRISHA320@gmail.com.
Awesome. And we'll have that on the screen. The Mad Russian is going to work some magic and have that appear right through here. And then we're also going to have that in the show notes for you as well. And guys, with that, thank y'all for tuning in once again to another episode. We appreciate y'all.
Thanks,
love
guys.
y'all. If you've got any questions for us, if you've got recommendations, if you want to suggest a topic, if you want to tell us how awesome we're doing, or maybe if you want to tell us how horrible we're doing, hey, you can do all that. Unashamed
Or you want to find us
podcast.
how Josh said the right name the entire
The right
episode.
name. I said the right name, and I said reconciliation.
I'm proud
Correct.
of you.
All in the same episode.
That's great.
So you can do that at unashamedpodcast@yahoo.com. Unashamedpodcast@yahoo.com, and that will appear right here in this space. But anyway, with that, y'all, we love y'all, and until next time, remember to be unashamed.
Thanks, guys. Stay sober.